Welcome to What's the Scenario with PLRB, where we explore claims and coverage scenarios relevant to insurance professionals. I'm Alicia Watley.
I'm Mike Broad.
I'm Tim Havler.
And I'm Jeff Korinsky.
So, Jeff, what's the scenario?
Well, today we've got a property manager who's responsible for a warehouse that stores steel coils. And there's a hailstorm that hits their town. We'll pick Texas. And
Nice.
I think they have some hail there in Texas.
They do. Big hail. Everything's big in Texas.
And afterwards, the manager feels like there's been more leaks than there used to be. And they, notice that some water is pooling on the edge of the roof, and they file a claim. And the adjuster goes out there, and they reveal that there are some minor dents from hail. And the policy has a cosmetic damage exclusion. So the adjuster thinks that this will resolve the claim, end of story, and is surprised to find out that the property manager hired an expert to combat the claims that the damage is excluded cosmetic damage.
Oh, I have a question for the group, and I have a story if you want me to do it. But has anybody ever had a leak that started after a storm, but you weren't quite sure if it was started by the storm? All right,
I'll
good.
go before you quick, Mike, on my story. And Jeff knows this well because every week he walks into my office and looks up at the ceiling and sees another water stain up there and says,
Yes.
We really need to get that leak fixed. So short answer, yes.
And it was the same in my office, Tim, there too, that, I was noticing one day that it was raining outside pretty heavily. And I was looking at the blinds, and there's a little drawstring on it that will put your blinds up or down. And I had a little waterfall going down my blinds on that string that was then pooling at the edge of my marble sill there of the window. And I had a nice, not only just a leak that caused some damage to the ceiling tiles, but an actual waterfall coming down. It's kind of calming and relaxing, but then you think, that water might be causing other issues too. So I think we might have a problem at our office sometimes, Tim.
I don't have that problem.
I know Alicia's got the good office.
I've had several good offices.
You're lucky.
Yay.
Well, I have never found water intrusion to be calming or relaxing to me, but nor did the property manager in this claim.
Good point.
So what should we talk about first in this scenario?
Want me to start?
Sure.
Cosmetic damage, is it excluded?
Well, we had an earlier podcast where we just, addressed that. But that was assuming that the policy did not contain a cosmetic damage exclusion. And in this scenario, we're throwing in that there was a cosmetic damage exclusion. So you could think like, okay, end of story, no coverage, like the adjuster did in this claim. But really, not all cosmetic damage exclusions are the same.
Ooh, do tell.
So, back in 1756, when they started doing cosmetic damage exclusions, it actually was probably, less than 20 years ago when these things started appearing. So it wasn't when I was born, but...
wasn't when Benjamin Franklin, he didn't introduce that one?
No, he didn't.
Okay.
But, they started out with just, hey, there's no coverage for cosmetic damage. And pretty much courts universally were like, what does that mean? What is cosmetic damage? If you're not going to tell us what cosmetic damage is, then it's ambiguous and it really carries little to no weight. So, you can't just do what the adjuster did in this claim and deny just because you have a cosmetic damage exclusion. It really depends on the facts and the language. So, we could say, like, what if there is no leak, but there's pooling?
I see where you're going with this.
So,
pool would add a lot of value to your property, so it would be a good thing, right?
I guess, although they are expensive to maintain. But I would say, what is pooling? I mean, pooling is basically when the water starts collecting in those little hail dents that seem innocuous. And you say, hey, no water's coming through here, and we have a cosmetic damage exclusion. But it really comes down to what does the endorsement say? And like I said, if it just says cosmetic, you're out of luck. But let's kind of go through a little quickly through the kind of evolution of types. There is a Texas case where there was a number of exclusions. And in those exclusions, there was one that said change in appearance. And the courts in that Texas case said, okay, well, excluding change in appearance, that's not clear enough. The dents, let's say, because what happens about functionality or future damage? And I believe in at least one fairly recent Texas case where they said excluding coverage for change in appearance, losses that are just change in appearance. What happens if the insured alleges that, hey, there's these dents have increased the likelihood of future interior water damage. In other words, it's not leaking now, but it will eventually because of these dents. So in a situation where we've got no immediate leak, but just pooling, that pooling can lead to future water damage. And the cosmetic damage exclusion isn't going to apply if you can truly show that it's increased the likelihood of future damage, said this Texas court. And we've had stuff where courts, there's a Colorado court where the language was the no longer prevent water from leaking. In other words, we're going to exclude coverage for cosmetic damage unless it's leaking or any other prevents the roof from performing any other intended function. So they tried to be broad to encompass more, but the court in Colorado said that's ambiguous.
I mean, we're talking about a roof. The function of the roof is to, provide cover, correct?
Yeah. And there is, I mean, your typical hail damage. There's language that I think one of the ISO forms has this in the CP. No coverage for marring and pitting, or things, hail damage like that alters the appearance. But then they added, but does not prevent the roof from functioning as a barrier as it did before. And that one has tighter language, I'll say, less ambiguity. Texas court has found that to be not ambiguous, but then it raises a question of fact. So the question of fact is it functioning as it did before? And in our scenario, we've got some leak before, but now we've got a lot of leaks. So
Jeff, my question there is, my experience is that you're always going to have a policyholder or a public adjuster saying, well, yes, the functionality has been compromised. We expected 20 more years out of this roof. Now we're only going to get 5 more years.
Right.
Whereas the adjuster looking at it might be looking for some sort of basis for that comment. How does this work with, do experts get involved in this? Is the burden of proof go on one side or the other?
Well, in terms of everyone's got an opinion, on every side, and a homeowner or a property owner, they're quick to allege some of the the things that you've said, like, hey, this has impacted the functionality of my roof down the road, or, it's shortened the life expectancy. And there are a number of courts that have said, you know what, if you're a homeowner or a property manager in this case, you can testify to, hey, I went up on the roof and there's dents. You might even be able to, if you're a property manager, testify to value, like, it's lowered the value. But the typical, I'll say, layman is not, some courts have said that's outside of your knowledge and you don't get to testify to that. So where you have, let's say, a insurance company that has hired, whether it's an engineer or a roofing expert who truly knows, can look at the roof and know whether it's shortened the life expectancy or increased the likelihood of it leaking, that testimony will be permitted, compared to a layman who is just saying, well, I think, obviously this is going to cause harm. That testimony can be barred in a number of courts, and including Texas. And there's a Tennessee case also where they said, talking about the life expectancy or functionality of a roof is really a technical, scientific testimony and not just for the everyday man. So when you get into those questions of facts about functionality or life expectancy, you really need to not just make sure you're expert as the carrier has the expertise, but push back if you feel like the other side, if it's going to trial or what have you, they need to have the right people.
All right. Well, any other thing? Is there any state-specific things that you're aware of?
Well, there are not a ton of states that address this issue, but I, as a coverage attorney, you'd always want to, or as an adjuster, you'd want to check to see if there are any bulletins out there or Department of Insurance orders or directives. Wyoming has something for metal roofs, a bulletin, and they tell the insurance industry, it's okay to have a cosmetic damage exclusion for metal roofs, but it's got to be voluntary, meaning the insured has to be asked to opt in. You can't just automatically add it and then wait for them to say, yeah, I don't want that. It's got to be clear and optional. And then Connecticut has something that's not on the coverage side, but it's more on the underwriting side, which I thought was interesting. They have a provision that says a company cannot choose to non-renew due to discoloration or streaking of the roof. There needs to be actual evidence of material degradation. But they did say that ponding could be a reason to non-renew. So to me, that kind of helps. That could be brought into issues of whether you have a cosmetic loss or not, at least in Connecticut. If it's just kind of discoloration or streaking, then maybe that is cosmetic. But if there's some kind of material degradation or ponding, you might have to pay those types of losses. So it's just, people always look to see are there cases or statutes, but don't forget to check the DOI or, for bulletins on that. I think that it can definitely be sometimes some extra guidance, I'll say.
So, Jeff, are there any other takeaways we can from this? Are there any other takeaways from this scenario that you'd like to share?
Well, I would say don't just say, Yahoo, I've got a cosmetic damage exclusion. I can deny this claim at the end of the story. It really isn't. You have to look at what language it is. If there's no definition of cosmetic in your endorsement, in my opinion, it's the same almost as having no exclusion. You want something that's going to be unambiguous, and even when you have the cosmetic exclusion, it's still going to result in a question of fact. Doesn't mean that it will never be enforced, but you're still going to have to look at things like functionality, and life expectancy, especially if there isn't direct language in the endorsement about that. And another takeaway is, you should look. There are a lot of, especially in the commercial side, policies where you go to the underlying policy and you say, hey, there's nothing here that talks about cosmetic. And a lot of times they're not, even with newer policies, they're not written into the underlying policy, but rather they're a separate endorsement that you should be looking for.
So, Mike, where can an adjuster go to learn more?
Well, Alicia, check us
I
out.
know, but we got to share with everyone else.
Good point, Alicia. Thanks for bringing me back. Yes, always go out to plrb.org, check out our website. I know that there's cool stuff out there and regulatory bulletins that are on roofing issues, so check those out. Lots of state by state, 50 state guides on a whole bunch of topics, especially stuff like matching. And you could also just check, make sure, as Jeff said, most importantly, do you even have a cosmetic damage endorsement there? And then if there's any questions about it, would it apply in my state? What else you could do is reach out to PLRB. Fantastic coverage attorneys like our friend Tim there who can research and see, here's what your state, how they've defined this here cosmetic damage and how your endorsement may or may not apply. We're here to help. We are your resource at PLRB, Alicia. Hey, and would you be kind enough to put those on the show notes for us?
Sure, I can do that, or our producer can do that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we'll also have a recap of the key points from this episode. We'll have links to our social media. There's information on how to submit your own adjuster story. So,
What?
I know, looking for adjuster stories. So if you're out there, we want to hear them. So don't forget to subscribe and give us a great rating. And we'll see all of you next time.
All right, 5 stars. See you, everybody. Thanks for being here, Jeff.
My pleasure.
The views and opinions expressed in this resource are those of the individual speaker and not necessarily those of the Property and Liability Resource Bureau, its membership, or any organization with which the presenter is employed or affiliated. The information, ideas, and opinions are presented as information only and not as legal advice or offers of representation. Individual policy language and state laws vary, and listeners should rely on guidance from their companies and counsel as appropriate.